Get out before the kids wake up. Jaewon's voice was flat, cold, the kind of cold that comes only after months of not caring anymore. Claire didn't move right away. She looked past him, into the house where her son and daughter were still sleeping, then back at the man she had married 10 years ago. She picked up her own suitcase, stepped past him into the rain, and stopped at the gate. "One more thing," she said quietly. "Check the mailbox tomorrow morning. There's something in there, addressed to your mother. She's going to want to read it before she calls me a gold digger again." Jaewon stood frozen in the doorway, suddenly unsure of himself. For the first time in years. Why was she smiling? Why wasn't she crying? And why did the word mailbox make his stomach drop? By sunrise, Claire was standing behind iron gates in Gangnam that even her own husband had never seen. Gates that opened the moment she typed in a code only she knew. Everything Jaewon believed about his quiet, obedient wife was about to fall apart, and he wouldn't even understand how badly until that mailbox was opened. This is her story, and it starts on the night everyone thought she'd lost everything, because 2 years before that rainy night, Claire made a promise to herself, a promise no one, not her husband, not his mother, not a single person at that dinner table ever knew she was keeping, and what she built in silence, while everyone underestimated her, was about to walk out that door with her and change everything. 10 years before that night in the rain, Claire Dawson was a 24-year-old English teacher, standing in front of a classroom in Seoul, completely unaware that the quiet, well-dressed man waiting outside the school gates there to pick up his cousin was about to change the entire direction of her life. His name was Jaewon Kang. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He was patient, attentive, endlessly curious about her life. Back home in Atlanta, her family, the food she missed, the music that still made her homesick at 2 in the morning. For a woman thousands of miles from everything familiar, that kind of attention felt like being seen for the first time in years. Jaewon came from a respected real estate family in Gangnam, the kind of family whose name opened doors before a conversation even started. And his mother, a sharp, composed woman everyone simply called Madame Cho, made her feelings about Claire clear from the very first meeting. "A foreigner," Madame Cho said flatly, not even bothering to lower her voice, while Claire stood just a few feet away in the hallway. "My son could have chosen anyone, and he chose this." Claire heard every word. She said nothing. She told herself that respect and patience would eventually soften a woman like that. The same way she believed love was something you proved through sacrifice, rather than something you were simply, freely given. She was wrong about both. She just didn't know that yet. For the first 5 years, though, life felt full. Jaewon proposed on a rooftop overlooking Namsan Tower, promising her a partnership, not a hierarchy. She believed him completely. They married in a small ceremony Madame Cho barely attended, and within 2 years, Claire gave birth to their son, Ethan. 4 years after that came their daughter, Lily. Claire left her teaching job the year Ethan was born, and never went back. She told herself it was temporary, a season, something she'd return to once the children were a little older. Season after season passed. She never did. By the time their 8th anniversary approached, Claire had become, by every traditional measure, the perfect Kang family wife. She spoke fluent Korean. She managed the household with quiet precision. She never once raised her voice at Sunday dinners, no matter how many backhanded compliments Madame Cho offered about her cooking, her accent, her clothes. But Jaewon had already started changing, long before Claire let herself notice it clearly. It began with small things. Longer hours at the office. A phone he started angling away from her on the kitchen counter. A new habit of stepping outside to take calls he never used to hide. Claire told herself it was stress. She told herself successful men, in demanding families, sometimes pulled inward before they came back around. So she kept the house running, kept the children fed, and loved, and laughing, kept smiling through Sunday dinners, and waited for her husband to come back to her. He didn't come back. He drifted further, and the very first sign of exactly how far he'd already gone was already on its way to their front door, wrapped in expensive paper, tied with a silk ribbon. Claire didn't know it yet. Standing in her kitchen that morning, humming to herself while she packed her children's lunches, but the woman she was about to become, the one strong enough to survive what was coming, and patient enough to build something no one believed she was capable of, was already waiting quietly underneath the wife everyone thought they knew. She just hadn't met her yet. The first crack in the story Claire had been telling herself arrived on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a florist who had no idea he was about to change everything. A massive bouquet of white peonies showed up at the front door, wrapped in expensive paper, tied with a silk ribbon. Claire had never once told Jaewon she liked peonies, mostly because she didn't. She signed for the delivery, thinking, hoping, maybe that it was an apology. He'd missed Lily's school event the week before. Finally remembered, she thought. She opened the small card tucked between the stems, expecting her own name. Yuri, thank you for last night. You make me feel young again. Jay. Claire stood in the doorway holding those flowers for what felt like an eternity. It was probably closer to 10 minutes. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. What surprised her most, looking back, was how calm she felt, like some quiet part of her had already suspected this moment was coming, and had simply been waiting for the proof to catch up. She didn't call Jaewon. She didn't scream. She didn't cry, or throw the vase against the wall the way she imagined a woman in her position might. Instead, she called the florist back. There's been a mix-up, Claire said pleasantly. I believe these were meant for someone named Yuri. Could you resend them to the correct address I found the delivery slip? The flowers card and all were redirected within the hour. That evening, Jaewon came home and asked, almost too casually, did any deliveries arrive today? No. Should there have been no reason? Just checking. She served him dinner. She asked about his day. She listened to him complain about a difficult client and nodded in all the right places while somewhere inside her, a door quietly closed. Weeks passed. Claire kept watching, though she never let it show. She noticed the way his phone buzzed differently, now shorter vibrations. Quickly silenced. She noticed how he started showering the moment he walked through the door. Even on days he swore he'd been stuck in meetings all afternoon. The second piece of proof arrived almost by accident. The way most affairs eventually reveal themselves to the one person paying attention. Jaewon left his phone on the kitchen counter one evening. Stepping into the shower, it buzzed once, screen lighting up beside the fruit bowl. Claire wasn't the kind of wife who normally checked her husband's phone. She'd never needed to before, but something told her to look. So she did. Can't stop thinking about Jeju. When can I see you again? Claire read it twice. Set the phone back exactly where it had been. Samma Engel. Sam tilt. And went back to folding laundry at the kitchen table, as though nothing had happened at all. When Jaewon came out of the shower minutes later, he found his wife exactly where he'd left her, humming softly. Everything okay, he asked, drying his hair with a towel. Everything's fine, Claire said, smiling up at him. Lily wants pancakes for dinner. You okay with breakfast food twice this week? Whatever makes her happy, he said, kissing the top of her head. Before heading toward the bedroom, Claire sat there another moment, the towel from Ethan's school uniform still warm in her hands, and she made a decision that would define the next several months of her life. She wasn't going to confront him with suspicion. She was going to find out exactly who Jaewon Kang had become with her own eyes before she said a single word. That night, lying awake beside a man who no longer felt entirely like her husband. Claire thought about her son, who had started asking, almost daily now, why his father was never home for dinner. She thought about her daughter, still too young to notice anything was wrong, reaching for a father who was already halfway gone. Whatever she found next, she promised herself quietly in the dark. Her children were never going to grow up believing this was what love was supposed to look like. She had no idea yet just how far that promise would carry her, or how close she would come, over the next 2 years, to losing everything before she ever got the chance to walk away with it. The opportunity to see the truth for herself came 3 weeks later, and what Claire would witness through those hotel lobby windows would leave her sitting perfectly still for nearly 20 minutes afterward, unable to make herself move. She told Jaewon she was taking the children to visit her friend Naomi for the afternoon. Half true, she dropped Ethan and Lily off, asked Naomi to keep them a few extra hours, and gave no explanation beyond that. "There's something I need to check on," she said. Naomi, who had watched Claire grow quieter over the past several weeks, didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Be careful," and closed the door behind her. Claire changed in her car outside a shopping center, swapped her soft cardigan for a long dark coat, oversized sunglasses, a scarf she'd bought years ago and never worn. She drove to a 5-star hotel in Gangnam, a name she'd overheard once. During a phone call Jaewon thought she wasn't paying attention to and took a seat in the lobby cafe. Facing the elevators, she ordered a coffee, barely touched it, and waited. Nearly 2 hours passed before the front doors opened, and Jaewon walked in, dressed casually, checking his phone. A young woman was already waiting near the concierge desk, her posture relaxed. Familiar, the kind of familiar that told Claire everything. Before a single word was exchanged, Jaewon walked straight to her, wrapped his arms around her waist, kissed the top of her head, the exact same gesture he used on Claire every single morning before leaving for work. The two of them disappeared behind the closing elevator doors like people with absolutely nothing left to hide. Claire didn't cry. She didn't chase after them. She ordered a second coffee, sat there until her hands stopped trembling, then drove home to collect her children, humming along to the radio the entire way. Because Ethan always asked why she was quiet in the car. And today, of all days, she needed him not to ask. The final piece arrived a month later. Almost too easily, Jaewon announced a business trip, a conference in Jeju. 4 days away. Claire offered to pack his suitcase, the way she always had. While he showered, she reached into his laptop bag for his charger and found a printed itinerary folded in the front pocket. 2 names, side by side, his and Yuri's. Same flight, same room, party of 2. Claire folded the paper exactly along its original creases, slid it back into place, and when Jaewon came out of the bathroom, he found his wife sitting on the edge of their bed, smiling. "Everything's packed," she said. "Have a safe flight." That night, lying awake long after he fell asleep beside her, Claire made a decision. She wasn't going to explode. She wasn't going to hand him the easy ending he'd probably already imagined for her, the emotional wife, the dramatic scene, the villain in whatever story he'd eventually tell his mother. Instead, she gave herself 6 months. 6 months to see if any part of the man she'd married still existed. If he came back to his family on his own, she would find a way to start over. If he didn't, she would leave that marriage exactly the way she'd entered it, on her own terms, and never, ever, empty-handed. The 6 months that followed moved quietly, the way most countdowns do before anyone notices they're already running out of time. Ethan, 7 now and increasingly perceptive, asked her one night, completely unprompted, "Are you and Appa going to get a divorce?" Claire smoothed his hair back. "Whatever happens between your father and me," She said carefully, "You and your sister will always be loved and taken care of. That's the only thing that will never change." At a Sunday family dinner, Madame Cho leaned across the table with a satisfied little smile. "You look tired lately." "Claire, marriage isn't easy when a woman doesn't know how to keep her husband interested." Jaewon said nothing. Claire smiled, the same practiced smile she'd worn for a decade. "I've never had trouble keeping myself interesting," she said. "Maybe the question is whether everyone at this table still knows how to appreciate it." It was around this time, quietly, almost accidentally, that Claire began building something of her own. A few freelance translation jobs, picked up through an old university contact. Small money, but hers, deposited into an account under her maiden name, using an address Jaewon would never think to check. She told exactly one person, and what her friend Naomi was about to show her, a small, unknown biotech startup, too risky for anyone in Jaewon's world to take seriously, was about to change absolutely everything. Naomi had watched Claire's marriage quietly unravel for months, offering nothing but careful support and the occasional question Claire wasn't ready to answer yet. One evening, over coffee, while the children built a puzzle on the living room floor, Claire finally told her everything. The flowers, the message on the lock screen, the hotel in Gangnam, the itinerary folded inside the laptop bag. Naomi listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening with every detail. "Why haven't you said anything to him?" she finally asked. "Because the moment I say something," Claire said, "it becomes a fight I have to win with anger. In front of his mother, in front of a family that already thinks I'm not good enough. I'd rather win it a different way." "What way is that?" Claire looked down at her hands. "I don't know yet, but I know I'm not leaving that house with nothing. Not after everything I gave up to build it." It was Naomi who first mentioned the startup, a small biotech company, still mostly unknown outside a narrow circle of investors. Too small, too new, too risky for people used to the kind of safe, established real estate the Kang family had built their fortune on for 3 generations. "I'm not telling you to bet the house," Naomi said, sliding a folder across the table. "I'm telling you, if you have anything set aside, even a small amount, this is the kind of thing that could actually go somewhere." Claire had almost nothing to invest at first. A few $100,000 won from her translation work. Money that felt enormous and terrifying. To risk all at once. She put in what she could and promised herself she'd only add more if she earned it without ever touching a single one from the household budget. For 4 months, the investment grew quietly, steadily. Alongside a life Claire was learning to live in 2 separate halves. By day, she folded laundry, packed lunches, sat through Sunday dinners, absorbing every backhanded comment Madame Cho offered about her cooking. By night, she read financial reports under the covers by phone light, teaching herself terms she'd never once needed before. Jaewon noticed none of it. He was too occupied with a second life he still believed was completely invisible. Too confident, after 8 years, that his quiet, obedient wife could never be building something entirely her own beneath his notice. But someone else in the family had already started to notice, and by the 5th month, that quiet suspicion nearly cost Claire everything. It began with a phone call she was never supposed to overhear. Claire had come upstairs during a Sunday visit to check on Lily, who'd gone to lie down with a headache, and was walking past the study when she heard Madame Cho's voice through the half-open door. Low, clipped, nothing like her usual tone. "I don't care what it costs," Madame Cho was saying. "I want to know exactly where that woman is getting her confidence from lately. Something has changed, and I want to know what it is before my son signs anything he can't take back." Claire stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard through the door. Her mother-in-law had hired someone, a private investigator, a family friend who specialized in exactly this kind of discreet inquiry. Claire backed away slowly, slipped into the bathroom down the hall, and sat on the edge of the tub, running through every thread that could be pulled: the translation account under her maiden name, the post office box, Naomi's name attached to the biotech investment. If the investigator found even one of those threads and followed it far enough, 5 months of quiet work could unravel before she'd ever had the chance to use it. That night, Claire called Naomi in something close to panic, the calm she'd carried for months finally starting to crack. "She's having someone look into me," Claire whispered, pacing the kitchen. Even though she was alone in the house, I heard her on the phone. "She knows something is different." Naomi's voice turned serious immediately. "How much does she know I don't know? That's what scares me most." For nearly 3 weeks after that call, Claire lived braced for the moment Jaewon would come home with the wrong question. The one that would tell her the investigator had found something. She rehearsed answers in her head while she cooked dinner. She checked the post office box twice a week instead of once. She stopped taking translation calls at home entirely, moving them instead to a small cafe 2 neighborhoods away, where no one would ever recognize her. It was Naomi who brought in the person who would ultimately save everything, a lawyer named Grace Lim, who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. Women in complicated marriages, needing their assets protected quietly and quickly, before anyone came looking too closely. "We move everything now," Grace told Claire, in a small office far from Gangnam, far from anywhere the Kang name carried any weight at all. "Not next month. Now, whatever's under your own name needs to disappear into something an outside investigator can't easily trace." Within days, Grace had restructured everything Claire had built so far, layered behind legal protections that made tracing ownership back to her nearly impossible for anyone working off gossip and guesswork. Rather than real legal access. "We got there in time," Grace told her over the phone, her voice carrying none of its usual calm confidence. "But Claire, you cannot make a single mistake from here. Not one." The investigator's search, delayed just enough by Grace's quick work, eventually turned up nothing usable. Madame Shaw, frustrated and unable to explain her suspicion without admitting she'd been spying on her own son's wife, let the matter drop, convinced she'd simply been imagining things. Claire exhaled fully for what felt like the first time in weeks. But something in her had shifted permanently. She understood now exactly how fragile everything she was building still was, and exactly how much more careful she would need to become until the day it was finally, undeniably, hers. That same week, the 5th month of her 6-month countdown, brought a quiet confrontation of an entirely different kind, one that had nothing to do with investigators or hidden accounts. Jaewon came home one evening, tense and irritable in a way that had nothing to do with Claire, and snapped at Lily for spilling water on the dining table, his voice sharper than the moment ever warranted. The little girl's face crumpled instantly, and she ran to her mother, crying, while Jaewon stood there, looking almost surprised at his own reaction. Claire scooped her daughter up, calming her gently, and looked at her husband over the top of Lily's head. "She's 4, Claire said quietly. "Whatever's going on with you, it doesn't belong in this house. And it definitely doesn't belong pointed at your children." Jaewon opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. "You're right," he said finally, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. I've had a lot on my mind." Claire studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of the man she'd married a decade earlier, any flicker of the partnership he'd promised her on that rooftop overlooking Namsan Tower. She didn't find it. "I'm sure you have," she said simply, and carried Lily upstairs to bed, leaving Jaewon alone with his own silence. That was the night Claire stopped hoping, though she wouldn't fully admit it to herself for another few weeks. The 6th month arrived faster than she expected, and slower than she could bear both at once. Nothing between them had changed in any way that mattered. If anything, Jaewon had grown more distant, more careless about covering his tracks, as though some part of him had already decided the marriage was over, and simply hadn't bothered informing his wife of the fact. On the last night of her countdown, Claire sat alone in Ethan's room, watching her son's chest rise and fall in the soft glow of his nightlight, and made the decision she'd been circling for half a year. She wasn't going to wait for Jaewon to choose his family. He had already made his choice. Quietly, over and over every night, he came home late. Every excuse he offered without meeting her eyes. She was done waiting. But she still wasn't ready to leave, the way he probably imagined she eventually would, tearful and empty-handed. Begging a family that never wanted her to let her keep some small piece of the life she'd built. She had a small, growing investment account Jaewon knew nothing about. A friend in finance who believed in her more than her own husband ever had. A lawyer who had already once saved everything she'd built from being discovered too soon. Whatever came next, she would leave on her own terms, with everything she had quietly, patiently, relentlessly earned. The following morning, nothing on the surface changed, and that was precisely the point. Claire called Naomi that same week, and the two of them sat across from each other at Naomi's kitchen table. The biotech folder spread out between them again, this time alongside a notebook full of Claire's own handwriting. "I want to go further than translation money," Claire said. "I want to build something real. That means being patient," Naomi said. "It means not touching whatever we build for a long time, even when things get hard at home. And after what almost happened with your mother-in-law, it means being even more careful than before. Can you do both?" "I've been patient for 8 years," Claire said quietly. "I think I can manage a little longer. And careful, I think I just proved I can do." They started slowly, adding a portion of Claire's translation income to the investment every month, tracking it in a spreadsheet only the two of them could access. Claire absorbed every lesson like a woman starving for information. She'd been denied her entire adult life, staying up long after Jaewon fell asleep, reading quarterly earnings reports under the blanket, teaching herself patterns he'd spent his entire career learning from his father. 8 months in, the biotech company quietly announced a breakthrough in a clinical trial. Not public yet, not headline news, but enough to send its private valuation climbing fast. "You need to sit down," Naomi said over the phone, her voice tight with excitement. "Our stake just tripled, and this is still early." Claire sat slowly at the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular, feeling something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Not relief. Exactly. Something closer to power, quiet. Unfamiliar. Settling into her chest. She didn't celebrate loudly. She didn't tell a single person outside Naomi. That night, she made dinner as usual. Listened to Jaewon complain about a colleague. Helped Lily with a coloring page, carrying a secret that was slowly, quietly reshaping her entire future. The company was fully acquired 14 months after Claire's first small investment, in a deal that made brief headlines in Seoul's financial papers buried on a page Jaewon never read. Her stake, built from nothing but translation, money, and patience, had multiplied more than 40 times over. "What do I do now?" Claire asked, sitting across from Naomi in a quiet cafe the day the deal closed. Naomi slid a folder across the table, thicker than the last. "Now," she said, "we make sure nobody can ever take this away from you. And this time, we don't wait for someone to come looking before we protect it." Over the following year, Claire converted her windfall into property. Methodically, patiently, the way she'd watched the Kang family build their own fortune for a decade, without ever once being allowed to participate in it herself. A small commercial unit first, held under a private trust in her name. Then, a residential building in a growing district outside the city, bought below market value from a seller eager to close quickly. At home, The marriage continued its slow, quiet collapse. Jaewon's absences grew longer. His excuses grew thinner. He stopped even bothering to hide his phone, not because he'd grown careless with guilt. Claire suspected, but because some part of him had already stopped caring whether she noticed at all. One evening, nearly a year and a half after Claire began building her secret foundation, Jaewon came home early, looking distracted and tense in a way that had nothing to do with work. "We need to talk," he said, sitting down across from her after the children had gone to bed. Claire set down the dish towel in her hands, her heart steady, despite the sudden shift in his tone. "All right," she said. "Talk. I think we've grown apart," Jaewon said, choosing his words carefully. "I think we both know that." Claire looked at him for a long moment, considering how many months, how many years. She had waited to hear him say something honest. "I've known that for a while," she said quietly. He looked almost surprised by her calm. "So you agree, I agree. The marriage isn't what it used to be," she said. "I don't agree about why. Though, maybe you should ask yourself that question before you ask me to agree with you on anything." He didn't respond. He simply sat there, jaw tight, staring at the table between them, and eventually excused himself to bed without another word. What Claire didn't know yet, sitting alone in the kitchen long after he'd gone, was exactly how soon that readiness would be tested, or how perfectly, unknowingly, Jaewon himself was about to hand her the final piece she needed. The final piece of Claire's foundation came together almost exactly 2 years after that first small investment with Naomi's biotech recommendation. A property came onto the market in Gangnam, a sprawling modern mansion overlooking the district. Listed by a family quietly liquidating assets after a failed business venture. The asking price was steep, even by Gangnam standards, but Claire's portfolio, built patiently over 2 years of properties, dividends, and a startup investment that never stopped paying, could finally support it. She toured the house alone, walked through empty rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen large enough to fit her entire childhood home inside it. Twice over, a garden overlooking the sprawling lights of the city below. She stood in the master bedroom, imagining her children's laughter, filling hallways that had never once heard a cruel word spoken inside them. "This one," she told Grace over the phone that evening. "This is the one." The paperwork closed 8 months before the night Jaewon finally threw her out. Though Claire never moved in during that time, she kept the house fully furnished, staged, waiting, a secret sanctuary she visited only occasionally, standing alone in its silent rooms, preparing herself for a day she still hadn't allowed herself to fully imagine. A few weeks after the final paperwork closed, Grace met her at a small cafe near the property and slid a fresh set of keys across the table. "Everything's ready now," Grace said simply. "The trust, the deed, the legal protections, all of it. Whenever you need it, it's already yours." It has been, for a while. Claire held those keys in her palm for a long moment, felt their unfamiliar weight, and slipped them into her bag without a word, unsure. Even then, exactly when she'd finally need them, she told no one, outside of Naomi and Grace, not her own family back in Atlanta, not a single person in Jaewon's world. She continued managing the household exactly as she always had, cooking dinner, packing lunches, attending Sunday gatherings at Madame Cho's table, absorbing every quiet insult with the same practiced patience she'd worn for a decade, all while holding the keys to a life none of them could have imagined. The final months moved quickly. Jaewon grew careless, in a way that told Claire he no longer believed there was anything left to protect. He came home later. He stopped offering excuses some nights, simply walking through the door and heading straight to the shower, without a word. One evening, Ethan asked her directly in the quiet, matter-of-fact way children sometimes ask the hardest questions, whether his father even lived with them anymore. He lives here. Sweetheart, Claire said gently, smoothing his hair back. He's just been very busy. Ethan studied her face for a moment. The kind of skepticism only a child who has learned to read his mother's expressions can manage. Okay, he said finally, clearly not convinced. Too young to push further. Lily, for her part, had simply stopped asking where her father was most nights, folding her disappointment away quietly, the way small children sometimes do, storing it for a version of herself, old enough to understand it later. Claire watched her children adjust to a version of family life that was slowly becoming unsustainable, and felt her resolve harden a little more each day. Whatever came next, she understood clearly. Now it wasn't going to be about winning back a man who had already left. In every way that mattered, it was going to be about making sure her children never grew up believing this was the best they deserved. The night everything finally broke arrived without warning, the way most endings do. After months of quiet build-up, Jaewon came home later than usual, smelling of the same floral perfume Claire had first noticed over a year and a half earlier. Except this time, he made no effort to explain it away. He walked into the kitchen, where Claire was finishing the dishes, and stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "I want a divorce," he said, his voice flat, almost bored, as though he were announcing a change in weekend plans. Claire turned off the tap slowly, dried her hands on the towel by the sink, turned to face him. "All right," she said. Jaewon blinked, clearly having expected a different reaction. "That's it." "All right. What else would you like me to say?" Claire asked evenly. "You've been telling me this for over a year." Without ever using the words, "I'm not going to pretend I'm surprised. Now that you finally have," he ran a hand through his hair, some of his composure slipping. "I think it's better this way," he said. "The marriage has run its course. We both know that." Claire studied him for a long moment. This man she had loved for over a decade, the father of her children, standing in their kitchen, delivering the end of their marriage with all the emotional weight of a business memo. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "It has run its course. It ran out a long time ago. You just didn't notice because you weren't the one waiting for something to change." Jaewon's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He walked past her toward the bedroom and returned minutes later carrying her suitcase, the same one they'd used for every family trip they'd ever taken, setting it down at her feet, with a gentleness that somehow felt crueler than if he'd thrown it. "I'll be generous," he said. "Take your things. Stay with Naomi for now. We'll figure out the apartment. And the kids. Later." Claire looked down at the suitcase, then back up at her husband. Something settled into place inside her calm. "Certain. Entirely her own. We'll figure out the kids right now." "Actually," she said, "I'm taking them with me tonight." "It's late," Jaewon started. "It's later than you think," Claire said, already walking toward the children's rooms. "Much later than you think." Outside, rain had begun to fall against the windows. Steady, quiet, the kind of rain that made the entire city feel like it was holding its breath. Claire packed a small bag for each child while they slept, careful not to wake them until necessary, moving through the house with a calm efficiency that surprised even her. When she finally woke Ethan gently, he blinked up at her. Confused. "Are we going somewhere?" "We're going somewhere safe." "Sweetheart," Claire said, helping him into his shoes. "I promise." Lily, still mostly asleep, simply wrapped her arms around Claire's neck and let herself be carried out to the car without a single question. Jaewon stood in the doorway, watching the entire scene unfold, something flickering across his face that might have been regret, though. Claire no longer had the energy to examine it closely enough to be sure. As she buckled the children into the back seat, She turned back toward the house one final time, rain soaking through her coat. "Check the mailbox tomorrow morning," she said. "There's something in there addressed to your mother. She's going to want to read it before she calls me a gold digger again." Jaewon's face went pale. "How long have you known long enough?" Claire said. "And you'll find out tomorrow exactly what I did with that knowledge." She got into the car, started the engine, and pulled away from the house that had been her entire world for 8 years, watching it disappear in the rearview mirror. Through sheets of rain, she didn't drive toward Naomi's apartment. She typed an address into her phone, one she'd memorized months earlier, and never once needed until tonight, and drove instead toward the one place in the entire city that had been waiting, quietly and patiently, for exactly this moment. The gates of the mansion opened the moment Claire entered the code, iron panels swinging inward without a sound, as though the house itself had been waiting for this exact night to finally welcome her home. She parked, sat for a moment with both hands still on the steering wheel, and allowed herself, finally, to feel everything she'd been holding back for 2 straight years, since the night a florist accidentally handed her the truth. Her shoulders shook once, twice, and then the tears came quiet. Unstoppable. Not from grief. Exactly. From something closer to release. She carried the children inside, one at a time. Lily first, then Ethan, laying them both down in a guest bedroom, tucking blankets around them, the same careful way she had every night of their lives, regardless of what house they happened to be sleeping in. Then Claire walked back downstairs alone, stood in the marble foyer of a home, fully paid for, in her own name, and simply stood there in the silence, listening to rain against the windows, feeling the weight of 2 years of secret work finally settle into something real. She didn't sleep much that night. She sat at the kitchen island with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, thinking about the letter sitting in Jaewon's mailbox, waiting for morning. That letter had taken nearly 3 weeks to prepare, working with Grace late into the evenings, gathering every piece of proof she'd quietly collected. Copies of the flower delivery mix-up, the note still attached, a screenshot of the message that once flashed across Jaewon's lock screen, a photograph taken from across a hotel lobby in Cheongdam that left no room for interpretation. The Jeju travel itinerary, 2 names, 1 room, party of 2, a short letter, in Claire's own handwriting, was sealed inside. "Dear Madame Cho, I know you never believed I belonged in this family. I spent a decade trying to prove you wrong anyway. I'm done proving anything to anyone now. I only wanted you to see the truth, before you decided, once again, that I was the problem." Morning arrived at the mansion in soft golden light, completely different from the storm of the night before. Across the city, in a house that suddenly felt far too quiet, Jaewon walked out to the mailbox, still unsettled from the night before, and found the thick envelope addressed to his mother, sitting on top of the usual bills. He didn't get the chance to intercept it. Madame Cho, always an early riser, had already collected the mail minutes earlier and was sitting at her kitchen table when Jaewon walked in. The envelope open in front of her, photographs spread across the table like evidence at a trial. "What is the meaning of this?" Madame Cho said, her voice low and dangerous, in a way Jaewon hadn't heard directed at him since childhood. Let me explain." "Explain what?" "Exactly," she said, gesturing at the photograph of him and Yuri outside the hotel. "Explain why your wife, the woman I criticized for a decade, is apparently the only adult in this entire family who behaved with any dignity." Jaewon had no answer for that. It took less than a week for word to spread beyond Madame Cho's kitchen. A colleague of Jaewon's, reviewing property registration filings for an unrelated business matter, stumbled across a familiar name attached to an unfamiliar address. A $40 million mansion in Gangnam, sole owner listed as Claire Dawson. Word moved quickly after that, the way it always does. in tightly connected business circles, whispered first, then openly discussed, until it eventually reached Jaewon through a phone call from an old business associate, asking, half joking, half serious, whether his ex-wife had won the lottery. Jaewon showed up at the mansion gates 2 days later, Madame Cho trailing reluctantly behind him, both of them staring up at the property with expressions somewhere between disbelief and dawning horror. Claire met them at the gate herself, arms crossed, calm in a way that clearly unsettled both of them. "How is this possible?" Jaewon demanded, gesturing at the house behind her. "Where did this money come from?" "I earned it," Claire said simply, quietly, patiently. "While you were busy building a second life you thought I didn't know about." Madame Cho stepped forward, her composure returning just enough to attempt one last familiar tactic. "You should have told your husband about this money," she said sharply. "A wife doesn't hide things like this from her family." Claire almost laughed, though nothing about the moment felt particularly funny. A husband doesn't book hotel rooms and Jeju flights for another woman. "Either," she said evenly, "but here we all are. Funny how that works." She looked directly at her mother-in-law. "And for what it's worth, whoever you hired a few months ago wasn't nearly as thorough as you were hoping." Madame Cho's face went still. Neither of them had a response to that. Jaewon stood there, jaw tight, looking at the wife he'd spent a decade underestimating, seemingly unable to reconcile the quiet, obedient woman he thought he knew with the one standing confidently in front of a mansion his own family couldn't have built twice over. "We need to discuss custody," he said finally, changing the subject to something he could still control. "We will," Claire said, "through lawyers. The way this should have started. The moment you decided our marriage wasn't worth protecting anymore." She turned and walked back through the gates without another word, leaving both of them standing outside, staring up at a house that represented everything they had never once believed her capable of building. The divorce proceedings that followed became, briefly, the subject of quiet conversation throughout Gangnam's tightly connected business circles. Not simply because of the money involved, though $40 million raised eyebrows anywhere, but because of the documentation Claire's legal team presented. Methodical, undeniable, built from 18 months of careful, quiet observation. Jaewon's lawyers attempted, briefly, to argue that Claire's sudden wealth entitled him to a larger share of the settlement, suggesting the investments had somehow been built using resources from the marriage. Grace dismantled that argument in a single afternoon, presenting bank records showing every one of Claire's investments had originated from her own independent freelance income, tracked meticulously from the very first deposit. Meanwhile, the evidence of the affair, the flowers, the messages, the hotel photograph, the travel itinerary made any argument about custody similarly one-sided. Jaewon's lawyers quietly advised him to settle, rather than risk a public custody battle that would only expose more of what he'd spent over a year trying to hide. In the final settlement, Claire was awarded primary custody of both Ethan and Lily, with Jaewon granted regular supervised visitation. He kept his position at the family business. Though several partners quietly distanced themselves in the months following the scandal, uncomfortable with the reputational risk, Madame Cho's social standing, built carefully over 3 decades, cracked in ways that never fully repaired, whispered about at the very same gatherings where she'd once whispered about Claire. Yuri, it was later heard through mutual acquaintances, left the country entirely within a few months of the story becoming public. Claire kept everything she had built. The mansion, the properties, acquired quietly over 2 years. The investment accounts Jaewon never knew existed, until it was far too late to claim any part of them. And most importantly, custody of the 2 children who had watched their mother transform, slowly and quietly, from someone who absorbed every insult without complaint, into a woman who refused to be underestimated one single day longer. Jaewon reached out only once. In the months that followed, a short message. Sent late one night. I'm sorry. I didn't know what I had. Claire read it twice. Sitting alone on the mansion's terrace, overlooking the Han River, the same view she had once imagined, standing in front of. Before any of this began, she didn't reply. Some apologies, she'd come to understand, weren't meant for the person receiving them at all. They were only meant to make the person sending them feel lighter, and she no longer felt any obligation to carry that weight for him. She set the phone face down on the table beside her, looked out over the water, and said the words quietly, to no one but herself and the city lights below. You thought I was leaving with nothing. She said, I was leaving with everything that mattered. Life inside the mansion slowly stopped feeling unfamiliar. Ethan claimed the bedroom with a view of the river as his own still. Some mornings, quietly asking Claire if this was really their house. Lily filled the playroom with drawings, taped haphazardly across every wall, laughing freely in a way she hadn't. In the final months of her parents' marriage, Naomi practically lived there on weekends. Some of Claire's favorite evenings became simply the two of them on the terrace, while the children played nearby, laughing about nothing important. Watching the city lights spread out below, Claire eventually started something she hadn't planned for. Mentoring young foreign women living in Seoul, women navigating cross-cultural marriages. Motherhood. The particular loneliness of building a life far from everything familiar. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she remembered exactly what it felt like to sit alone in a marriage that had quietly stopped protecting her. With no one in her corner, and nowhere to turn, people sometimes ask Claire, even now, what she'd tell another woman in that same position. Her answer never really changes. Silence isn't surrender. She says, sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do isn't the loudest confrontation in the moment. It's the quiet work nobody else sees, done patiently, for as long as it takes. She didn't get thrown out of her marriage that night in the rain. She simply walked, finally, into the life she had already built for herself. And for her children, one nobody else believed existed, until the gates opened in front of them. If Claire's story reminded you of your own quiet strength, or someone else's, this is where that story gets to matter. Subscribe if this channel has earned a place in your feed. And before you go, if you found that first bouquet of flowers, would you have waited or walked away that same day? I genuinely want to know where you land. Drop it in the comments. I'll see you in the next story.